Okay, so welcome everyone to the August 22nd, 2022 Parks Board meeting. I'd like to start off by doing a quick roll call. So when I call your name, please take yourself off mute and state your attendance. All right, Andrew E.
Present.
Thank you. Chris? I can see Chris, I couldn't hear him.
Present.
Got it, okay. Great. Marlene, I think she may be coming in a little bit later. Okay. David?
Present.
Nicholas? I believe he might be calling in. Okay. Brenda?
Present.
Right. And Katie? Right. Tim? Andrew M?
Present.
You? Danielle? Danielle?
Present.
Thank you. Brad?
Present.
Great. All right. So moving forward to the approval of minutes from June 27th, 2022. So just wanted to see if anyone has any questions, comments, or any corrections. All right, not seeing anything. Does anyone have any objections to the approval of minutes from the July 25th minutes? All right, I hereby approve the minutes. Thank you. So today we'll be going through two items on the agenda. The first, community investment strategy and Hillside Park update. I think I will open up the public comment prior to the Hillside Park update because I don't believe anyone has comment about the community investment strategy. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Sorry, finding the mute button. Hey, good evening, everybody. Jeff Watling, Parks and Community Services Director. Excited to bring back to you this item that we discussed last month. As you remember, a rather ambitious task and opportunity was asked of us by City Council and Mayor, and that was to evaluate and explore how and where up to $4 million of ARPA funds could be invested into our park system, namely the primary community parks that we identified as anchor parks as we'd been going through the planning process just prior to the pandemic. So tonight we're excited to give a progress report based on the feedback we received from all of you last month, both in terms of the criteria. If you remember, we had a really good conversation about evaluation criteria that we would utilize to filter and evaluate these potential sites. The potential sites being, possible sites being Tibbetts Valley Park, Veterans Memorial, sort of collection of veterans depot and pedestrian parks, Confluence Park, the City Council asked us to add and consider, and the Issaquah Creek corridors. So you also identified, and thank you, we had some volunteers for a subcommittee. So Andrew, Marlene, and Chris, thank you so much for your work. We had the chance to meet twice this last month, along with quite a bit of staff work. Did some really good work in taking that criteria, creating a matrix, and really doing at least an initial run through and evaluation of each of the sites. So the goal tonight is to present that information back to you, let you hear directly from your those that were on the subcommittee, your fellow park board members, as staff, as Jennifer walks through that evaluation. And then the other goal tonight is, and you'll see as we come to the end of that evaluation process, we feel that there's a number of more specific sites that begin to percolate based upon sort of the restrictions and needs in that this $4 million of federal money has to it. And so the hope is to get your feedback on the evaluations themselves, and see if we have some consensus on specific areas, specific parks, specific projects we want to focus on. That then would lead to the next round of work with the subgroup for really beginning to do scoping and some cost allocation that would come back to all of you in September. So with that goal in mind for tonight, I'm going to hand it over to Jen Fink to run through the matrix. Jen.
Hello, everyone. Give me one quick second here to share my screen. Can you see that? Hang on a second. I need to pull all of you up as well. So bear with me so I can.
Yes, we
see
can see
everyone.
it. We might want to just enlarge it a hair.
Then hang on. Then I need to take it out of screen mode. Let me do this.
Oh, actually, I'm just realizing WebEx now, everyone has the individual ability to Zoom.
Oh, you do?
At least I do on my laptop.
Well, I
that's a
just
new
zoomed too.
Thank you, but that's sorry. Pardon me, everyone. I'm fascinated by new features of web. Jen, take it away.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I really want to thank the ad hoc committee for dedicating almost 4 hours of their time to walk through this in grave detail. And I really hope that each of you took a moment to review this in your packet, being such important work. So to help with tonight's conversation, because we're not going to go through every little square. But what I will do is kind of introduce the several criterion that we had spoke about. And after each kind of section or two, I'll pause and we can do questions because this is a lot of information for us to go through. But also want to allow a lot of time for conversation at the end and also for the ad hoc committee to talk through some of their rationale, because this is really representative of their work given from the last meeting. So with that, as Jeff mentioned, we're taking a look at Tibbetts Valley Park, Veterans Memorial Field, including the area around the Senior Center, Depot Park, and Pedestrian Park, the Issaquah Creek Corridor. And for those of you who are not really involved with the process, there are 3 different reaches of Issaquah Creek Corridor that make up the span from Squash Valley Park at our southern boundary all the way to Lake Sammamish. And then Confluence Park, which is located on Rainier, just behind Dairy Gold, and really is a bridge between Old Town Issaquah and the future, or the central Issaquah core. So with that, one of the big things we took a look at is those criterion. The first one was really level of project readiness for each project. This project, as it being ARPA funded, is going to require us to try and near completion and be complete with the project in 2024. And there's a lot of work that goes through the design process, as well as getting contracts done and what is that could actually be achieved and built. And some of those project readiness items are, did we have multiple parcels involved, or is it a single parcel? Is it land that the city already owns, or did we have to go out and seek new land? Existing restrictions, what are the covenants on that property already? Master plan, is it actionable? And then we do have a few items on here that we haven't yet filled in, but we feel this is, we'll talk about those later. But we looked at each of these items for each of the parks. And what we did is really a yellow light, green light, red light, kind of like when you're driving, right? Green means go. Yellow means there's some hurdles, but sometimes you can get through the intersection, or maybe it's best to just stop. And then red, while it's not a bright red, we actually did a little color mixing and made oranges So you may see we don't have a brilliant bright red, but we do have kind of a darker orange and a lighter orange on this. And for those who are color challenged, I apologize for that, but there was reasoning not to place it red orange. And then what we did is we took all of those subcategories for each of this criterion, and we even added a criterion, which I will get to later, and color coded each individual one, and then collectively looked at each grouping. So I know you're all on screens at home, so I'm just going to try and orient you a little bit. So over here we have number one. This was the first criterion, project readiness. The numbers that are on this are the colors within the boxes with the bolder outline. These are the overall colors for each park for project readiness. So these would all roll up into a yellow color. So when we look at all the subcategories of project readiness at Tibbetts Valley Park, overall, we gave it a yellow. There's multiple parcels involved. There's an existing master plan, but it's outdated. We know we need to update that. There's a lot of critical areas and other parking agreements with that. When we go to Veterans Memorial, overall, we also feel that is a yellow. You know, there's some partial hurdles within that property, but nothing that is insurmountable for us to be able to move forward with a plan as far as readiness. We already own the land. There's one good thing about veterans is there aren't really any deed restrictions on those properties for us to be able to work through. When we look at the Issaquah Creek corridor, that was becomes a little more challenging, especially when we look at existing deed restrictions that may be on the property. As we know, over the years, we've acquired a lot of property that has grant funding and conservation easements on them. We also have a lot of critical areas, and I'll get to that in the next category. But we're also dealing with multiple parcels of land. And, you know, we've done a lot of public engagement around this already. And possibly, you know, it's actionable if we found the right first phase. So overall, while we did have an orange in here regarding deed restrictions, given what our first phase was, we didn't feel like it was an insurmountable opportunity. So that too was a yellow. Now, Confluence Park, for many of you who are familiar with that, this has had a lot of investment over the past few years, since 2014, 2015, starting with phase one and creek restoration, phase two, which led to the bridge and some of the new pathways. And then we've also done irrigation and turf improvements to the park. But there's still some existing work that needs to be complete over there. One of the items was in the park, and we'll talk about that, is phase four, which was the where the parks and facilities maintenance facility currently is, to the south of the East Fork of Issaquah Creek. But also within our previous work, there's still some outstanding things that haven't been completed, like the ACT house. There's some existing lighting that needs to be added along the main 12-foot pathway, the ACT house renovation, and making that more of a user-friendly place for the community or a picnic shelter. Also maybe enhancing or adding on to the existing playground area. So overall, felt Confluence Park taking out the facilities maintenance shop. Overall, the remaining work that needs to get done was a green. And we'll talk more about the shop feature as we go down into the other items. So I'm going to jump into critical areas and other site conditions. And for each of the parks, we really looked at what different agencies would be involved with the work we would be doing, what known critical areas are on site, and that includes wetlands, creeks, buffers, and also steep slopes. Other site conditions, parking. We know parking and the ability to get to some of our park spaces is really important. And then also trees. We know trees are a valued environmental asset within each of the parks. So we looked at, for Tibbetts, making sure I'm doing these in the right order here. Yes, Tibbetts. Tibbetts Valley Park, overall, we felt this was, when you looked at the different, even though a lot of agencies would be involved because of the creek, the wetlands, and some of the steep slopes, if we were looking at the site holistically and depending upon the area, and also the tribes may be involved, you know, overall, this would be a yellow. It's a normal permitting process, nothing that we as a city haven't been through before. We do know that there's critical areas in there, but we have parking lots and there are some trees in there that will need to be retained or further evaluated, depending upon what location is chosen within that park. When we look at Veterans Memorial Depot, right now we're just really looking at a city permitting process, being there's no environmental features there. We don't anticipate high level of involvement from other outside agencies during the permitting process. Also, there's no real environmental conditions there or potential tree assessment, you know, with the existing trees within the site, but we still felt that was very doable to be able to work within that. There's also on-street parking and nearby parking on street. And then also looking at the trees separately. So overall, Depot Park and pedestrian and Veterans Memorial, we felt that was a green as far as the readiness factor. And then when we move on to the Issaquah Creek corridor, again, knowing that is a very large stretch of land that goes from Squaw Valley Park to the south all the way to Lake Sammamish. We'd likely be dealing with a lot of different agencies, you know, Department of Ecology, Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps, tribes, possibly RCO, which is the State Recreation Conservation Office, because we have a lot of grant funded properties along the way. So that again would be a yellow. Critical areas as well, knowing we're working within the creek buffer. Issaquah Creek is a class 1 creek with salmonid. So obviously a lot more critical areas within that and a larger boundary buffer. So there would be a higher level of intensity of work with that. You know, parking, we're not really intending to have a designated parking area for the creek corridor, but that you could access it from anywhere within the city to be able to do that. And so overall, when we looked at all of these conditions, the ad hoc group really classified this as a yellow. While there's hurdles, they're all doable and somewhat of a normal permitting process. Now, when we get over to Confluence Park, the Eck House, while it is old, it is not on the historic register. But because it's an older structure, we still may have to make any changes to the building. We still may have to work with the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation and the city. We are in that area out of some of the buffer and critical areas that are associated with the stream. So we feel that any work in and around the Eck House or the existing playground area would be relatively easy to do. Now, I couldn't color code this. I should have made this into 2, so please forgive me. City and Department of Ecology, when we're looking at phase 4, which is the shop site, that is going to be a little bit more difficult because we'd have a lot of critical areas and other different agencies to deal with. But first, before we even got to that point, we'd have to have a new location for us to be able to move our facilities to. And we don't have that, and it would be a really costly endeavor for us to find new shop sites and get everyone moved within the time frame. And I don't think moving is not what we intend this money to do. And so we would not be able to get through a planning process and deliver a community park at the end of this time. So that is really should be an orange right there. But overall, when we look at just Confluence Park, we do have some green opportunities there. When we look at, some of the critical areas for phase 2, again, as I mentioned earlier, we're out of all of the critical areas, wetlands, so it should be pretty easy for us to add on to the Eck House or add on to the play area. But if we do get into phase 4, which is the shop site, again, we're going to have a lot more complications and environmental review we need to do on that site. So I am going to stop here. And now that we've gone through our first 2 topics, which is really level of project readiness and critical areas and other site conditions, and just take a pause and answer any questions you as the board may have, or an ad hoc committee, please feel free to speak up on some of your comments and thinking as well. Danielle, I see your hand up.
I have a couple questions or thoughts. With respect to Confluence Park, so that master plan is a pretty relatively recent master plan, that we did. So I feel good about that. My understanding was that if you're looking at that, where the Eck House is that did not have a deed restriction or a conservation easement.
That
Is that correct? So that has a little bit more flexibility. So even the yellow area there if we're looking at that matrix, if you're just looking at the Eck House area, we have flexibility there.
yes, we do. So
And
that
then
would be green.
the other thing I wanted to point out was even though the Veterans Memorial Field, there may not be specific deed restrictions, I think it's really important that everybody on the park board know the history about how that park kind of came about and was funded and the intent of the people who funded that. And that being for a ball field kind of community gathering space. So I think it's important that we note that as well.
That's a great thought there, Danielle. Thank you.
Brad, you had a comment?
So Jennifer, it looks like, so anything that's relating to phase 4 at Confluence Park should be orange, is that right? Or yellow? I mean, what would you
Yes.
categorize that?
Probably red.
I'd make it just flat out red. Yeah.
Well, I think it's kind of deceiving to not actually have that broken out. And so, for council who ultimately might look at this, it would be good to actually have those colors relating to phase 4.
Yes, and as you go through though the matrix, as we get to the bottom, we do break it out at the end when we talk about potential elements within them. But you're right, in this section here, I should have broken it out so I can easily correct that. But it is mentioned for which phase it is referencing here, so.
Okay.
And phase 4 is like the fun, active recreation component of Confluence Park that would really be like a deal changer in that area.
Correct.
And because it's city-owned land, my other recollection was that there were not deed restrictions on that property either because the city already owns it. So it could be really active, like you could play sports there. And what was contemplated in that master plan was, like beach volleyball or like that type of sport, not like a turf soccer field.
Right, a mix of amenities, but much more active. And you're absolutely right, Danielle. I think what makes phase 4 red is more the reality of it. It really can't be considered a park opportunity until the maintenance facilities and its current use are moved, and to move those to build new shop facilities and yard realistically is $20 to $30 million. So some of the opportunities, and you'll sort of see, and again, ad hoc committee, I know we did a great job of discussing this, but is there opportunity with that other area near the Eck House to maybe at least sprinkle some of those active elements over there? So
Yep.
all things for consideration.
Brad?
So Jeff, to clarify, so the movement of the facilities, would that fall under the category of parks, or would that fall under the category of facilities?
Well, that would fall under the category of facilities, but it all falls under the category of City of Issaquah.
Right.
And given a number of other facility priorities, that is, moving that specific shop facility is nowhere in any capital planning effort right now for facilities.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments before we move on? I want to make sure we leave ample time for board discussion.
I'll add a little bit too.
Great, thanks.
For
Chris.
those of you that haven't seen this, it reminded me a little bit of, when you're at a ball game and they have the break and they have like the elevator cars on the Space Needle race, and you vote for which one you think is going to win. So hang tight as you walk through these. We've been through 2 of the criteria, and there's how many more? 5. And
5, 6.
but certainly like the info of like what you recall, Danielle, is really important, and raising these questions are important. But also, I guess I'm suggesting that you maintain some patience and watch how this plays out. I know for me, when we started the first meeting, I had some thoughts about, well, from reading it, I bet you we're going to end up here. And as we journeyed down this pathway, I went all over the place, and still kind of am. So give it some time and go for it.
I think one more thing that I could add from the subcommittee meetings is initially, and if the board might recall, we had talked about doing some type of scoring matrix where there would be a weighted factor for each one, and depending on what the inputs would be, it would spit out a value to show that. And this simpler model, which I think was maybe Marlene's inspiration, with the red, yellow, and green, is meant to be more of a guidance than as prescriptive or granular, and potentially more detailed than would be worthwhile with the scoring system. And so I really liked that optimization, and just to be able to provide some high level simplification there to make discussion easier without getting into the weeds of, what's the difference between an 8 and a 9, or a 5 and a 7, or something like that on a more weighted type of scale.
Thank you for adding that, Andrew. That's really good. So if there's nothing more, we're going to hit the bottom of page 1 here and talk about level of immediate economic benefit. What we really tried to take a look at was, are there businesses nearby? Will this activity potentially draw new visitors to this area, or are we just building upon, the existing visitors? What is the long-term maintenance? And also, will this project spur future business and development and get people excited? I'm going to jump down to the last one there, the incubator at the bottom. We felt any of these projects, if done right, will potentially provide some enthusiasm into these areas, and has the opportunity to add or bring future businesses to the area or future development. So with that, when we look at immediate economic benefits, and we look at Tibbetts Valley Park, there's not a lot of things available to individuals. You have to walk a block away to go get food or drink when using the park. But would it draw new visitors to the area? Oh yeah, we know Tibbetts is a old park that is in dire need of some modern renovation to optimize its potential. And to when we take a look at the long-term maintenance, and this is really for all of them, you know, we opted not to rank those because they're really going to be dependent upon specific amenities that are chosen and selected as to what that influence is. But one thing to keep in mind, as with any of these projects, as with any capital project, City Council has asked us that when we put forth funding recommendations, as part of that, we also put forth what our maintenance requirements are going to be. So they're aware of that. So any future maintenance would be willingly taken on by the city and be part of future funding requests. So we don't really feel that that needs to be a determining factor at this point. But you know, we'll take a look because things like a splash park require a lot more maintenance than a playground. So that is something that as we get further down the line and start looking at more project specific elements, we can go back and rank. Okay. But right now, as we look at Veterans Memorial Field, and you know, there's businesses nearby, Old Town Front Street. I think the pandemic really heightened the need for outdoor and community gathering spaces in Old Town. You may remember there was a street area where we closed down Front Street for a while. There's parklets out there now with some businesses being able to have outdoor dining. So how could we maybe support some of that in the Veterans Depot and pedestrian park areas? And also there's a potential to draw new visitors to the area. So both Tibbetts Valley, even though we had a yellow, we know that Tibbetts Valley Park is right next to the boundary, you know, the northern boundary of Tibbetts Valley Park, which is Newport Way, is going to redevelop. And right on the other side is Central Issaquah. And kitty corner from Tibbetts Valley Park is going to be some new housing residents as well. Yes, Danielle?
I was curious why I'm not opposed to or I understand why you would classify maybe Tibbetts in a different way than Veterans Memorial for this businesses nearby. But to me, the Tibbetts is just as close to businesses now as and will be like right when that area is redeveloped for sure as Confluence Park. So I was curious why you treated those, because when you're in Confluence Park, you do need to walk, you know, a little bit before you come to like a restaurant or, you know, somewhere to a business. I was curious if you could share
I
why
think
those
part
were
of that
treated
was,
differently.
and I'm speaking for the ad hoc committee, so please feel free to chime in ad hoc if I misstate. Part of that rationale is right now there's really, you've got to walk on a city street, you've got sidewalks, you don't have some of that atmosphere where Confluence has an immediate connection. You know, you're only one block to Gilman Village. You also have the Rainier Trail to easily take you into Front Street and Old Town area. So it didn't feel it was quite as separate, or as it was more intuitive to have those adjacencies than at Tibbetts Valley Park right now, to go walk down 2 blocks to go to Target, or you have to walk 2 blocks to go up to Mall Street over in there. So just, I think it's kind of the existing atmosphere around each of those that cause that little differentiation. Not to say, and I think we're looking at if this project were built in the next 2 years, how is it going to be relating to those? You know, yes, for Tibbetts, there's going to be a long future impact with some of that.
I guess there are some businesses there that I've walked to from Tibbetts. I mean, like Gas Lamp for sure. You have the Top Pot. I mean, there are places that are close, but it doesn't really matter, I don't think, as with your matrix, because they're all kind of green. So, but I do want to just put that out there that Tibbetts is close to businesses, not
That's
Front Street, but
Sorry, Jeff here. That's a great point, Danielle. And if I just point out too, I think part of the elegance of this green, yellow, red approach, looking at each of the subsets within these, but then creating a sort of a general color for that category. If you see level of immediate economic benefit, both Tibbetts and veterans were overall given green, as opposed to the Creek Corridor and Confluence being yellow at this point. So I think the discussion sort of captured some of what you're saying as well, Danielle.
Brenda, did you have a comment?
I did. I have been trying to raise my hand here, but I don't see it. The button doesn't seem to work. I was clear back on parking, but it still has to do with businesses and parking. The parking is pretty premium downtown at Veterans right now. And if we make it even more desirable, it's wonderful and a good idea. But what are you going to do with more people down there?
Parking is, go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, it's a great question, Brenda. I know that planning department did a parking study a number of years ago. Yes, we can say it's a premium if you want to be right behind or near the business you're at. But I think in general, that parking study certainly recognized when you look at parking within a walkable distance of the park, the Rainier Trail, all the parking down along the Rainier Trail, there is quite a bit of parking still available in the downtown area. But definitely something we would want to take into consideration, right? So as we look at amenities, should we decide on focusing on an area or two within veterans, as we start looking at actually scoping and budgeting actual amenities, we'll want to pay very, very close attention to that.
Yes, Brad?
So why is Confluence under draw new visitors to area? It says yes, but it's listed as yellow, whereas the other three are all listed as yes, but they're green.
Good question. I think that was because part of that conversation with phase 4, and also there was also, when we look at some of the elements that would be included in phase 2, they could draw new visitors, but was it quite as exciting as some of the others? You know, we know phase 4 would be a big impact, but could we make phase 2 enough of an impact? And I think that's where there was a little discussion, like how stimulating could that be to really draw new visitors, or is it really providing more of an experience for the existing visitor rather than being an attractant for new, just to add some additional play areas or add a different picnic shelter to the space? Didn't feel like it was a huge attractant.
Okay, probably depends on what would happen with the Eck House.
I think so. Yeah. Think so. So are we good with kind of level of economic benefit and overall colors for the group on this segment? Like Jeff said, you know, Tibbetts and veterans, we feel are a little more green. As far as level of immediate economic benefits, the Creek Corridor, you know, that one was really dependent upon which location we chose. And then the Confluence Park we felt was yellow. It's kind of a moderate benefit there. Hi, Marlene.
Hi, we might want to just to clarify for Brad's point, maybe instead of just yes with nothing on drawing visitors, maybe we just say, you know, moderate for phase 2, or, you know, maybe we just make maybe more of a qualifier than just straight a yes without the context of why it's yellow.
Yes, I will add that. I had a note. Good call. Okay. Well, with that, we'll go down to our next page, which is page 4, or excuse me, page 2, criteria number 4, which was level of community access and benefit. Here, I think when we look at some of the community engagement we did with our anchor parks pre-pandemic, back in 2019, one of the things we heard from the community is they wanted all year round activities, places to go in the rain, things to do in the wintertime, and how can we start having more access and enjoyment within the parks? Also, is there community advocacy or interest groups that can really help get behind what it is we're doing and help support this project? And also, is it easily accessed, not only by sidewalks and neighborhoods, but is there transit, and is the site conducive to universal access for anyone of different disabilities? Obviously, any future improvements, we have to make ADA accessible, but what is the current conditions of these sites? So when we look at that and we look at Tibbetts Valley Park,
You're going to be done in time to water the back.
Yeah.
so when we look at Tibbetts Valley Park, and really for all of the different parks, when we look at year round, all season, that is really dependent upon the elements or the amenity that gets selected for each site. So again, this is an element we'll go back and rank later, but we know it's important for each of the various sites. So we didn't rank that one. So if we just really focus on the community advocacy and whether or not it's easily accessed, for Tibbetts Valley Park, green all around. Yes, we have sports groups. Yes, we have transit center nearby. There's vehicular access. It's, there's sidewalks to get there. It's a relatively flat site. Not to say that it doesn't need improvements, but there's general ease of access due to its location. Same with Veterans Memorial. There's a lot of focus groups with businesses and different individuals that can really get behind improvements there. We also have the senior center. And it too is transit nearby with the bus stop right at City Hall. There's sidewalks, relatively flat site. Yes, there are areas that need to have better access, but it is relatively accessible overall. The Issaquah Creek Corridor, there's a lot of community interest and advocacy. We know Issaquah Alps Trails Club would get behind helping us identify trail connections through the different neighborhoods, as well as Mountain to Sound Greenway. There's been long support for, as you recall, the Creek Corridor is not only connecting Squaw Valley Park to Lake Sammamish. We're looking at how we make habitat connections, how we get primary circulation route, but how do we also add additional secondary routes that get you to neighborhoods and businesses and destinations that people want. So to make the downtown and all three reaches, Pickering Reach, the Old Town Reach, and the Squawk Reach, more accessible and walkable for everyone on the valley floor. So with that, is it easily accessed? Well, depending upon the locations, it could be a little bit more of a challenge. We don't have a lot of sidewalks or crossings in different reaches, so we felt that was more of a yellow. Community advocacy in Confluence Park, didn't really feel if we add a playground that there's really going to be a big group getting behind that. There could be a few families, but not quite some of the support from other different interest groups for those improvements overall. So this ranked as a yellow. So we're looking at Tibbetts as a green, Veterans as an overall green, and the Creek Corridor and Confluence Parks as yellows. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if there's any additional questions. Okay, I really want us to get to the discussion, so I'm going to keep flying here and keep on with this, okay? Because we're almost there. Looking at park connections, I'm not going to go through each one of these because it's pretty self-explanatory, but we really looked at how does this connect to existing parks and trails, neighborhoods and destinations, as well as specifically transit, and ranked all of those based upon the different neighborhoods and just due to their proximity. And this was somewhat representative of the category above. Tibbetts Valley is green just due to its location. Veterans Memorial is also green. Yellow for Creek Corridor, and Confluence is also green.
I can add one comment about, I think that the thought of the subcommittee with the Creek Corridor being yellow at this point, it's kind of oxymoron, and that whole goal is connectivity. But to think of a small investment of $4 million, it would be hard to necessarily find one that's automatically connected to the degree that we'd be seeking.
Thank you, Jeff. That's spot on. Spot on. So when we looked at future phasing, this is where we got into some of our blending of colors and not going full red. We kind of did our multiple shades of orange by mixing yellow in. When we just looked at what areas of each park we could do, Tibbetts Valley Park, given the environmental conditions and all the other conditions we've talked about up above, to get a project that we could easily do, we could quickly do, we'd likely be taking a field and likely working off of the corner of Newport and 12th Avenue. So we know that that has some impact, and we're not yet sure how any development there would fit into any future master planning work. So that one is a little on the transitional difficult side for that. When we look at Veterans Memorial, including the area around the Senior Center, Depot Park, Pedestrian Park, $4 million at any location could be, because of some of the existing features that would likely, like parking, we could connect and enhance, but there might be more opportunity to phase in and around those elements, because we know within this project we're not going to be moving parking as part of it, or significant parking. So how could we work with somewhat of the bounds we already have for that? So we felt that was a little more green and doable given our park spaces. When we look at the Creek Corridor, we really started looking at really the Old Town reach, had the most land connections already, the most destinations, the most neighborhoods it impacts. However, there's still some challenges there with access and bridge crossings. And so while this isn't quite a yellow and it's not quite an orange or a darker orange, this is kind of a medium orange as far as how it would fit into the future phases and how much could we get with that 4 million, knowing we have permitting processes and other things that take time. But when we also looked at Confluence, we really felt that was green and really quite doable, and we know fits within the scheme of an existing master plan, and is really putting the finishing touches on the park for that. Other considerations, which I'm just going to quickly go through, was other influencing work underway with not only with the city, but with others and other site features. Tibbetts Creek, there's a sediment study going on. There's storm and surface water master plan. There's Newport Way improvements. This section doesn't have a profile yet. We're working on their citywide athletic field study, which hopefully will be done in the coming months. There's an existing osprey nest out in the middle on one of the light poles. There's existing public works pump house. So there's a lot of other things, and there's also a parking agreement with King County Metro, which could be really a lot of things for us to work through when we try and pick any one site or area. Yes, Danielle?
Sorry, it takes me a while to get to my mute button. The citywide athletic field study, I think, would also apply to Veterans Memorial. So that would be something I would like to see in that box as well.
Very good. I will certainly add that.
Great point, Danielle. That was something I was going to mention too. Is Jen, nice overview of the phasing. And again, the subcommittee, a lot of time spent on that because that's a really tricky part of this is how do we phase in a really smart way that allows future phases to happen? But discussion around the field at Veterans, Danielle, just so you know, and the rest of the park board knows, that really came up as well, that it would be problematic to try and do something with that field at Veterans as a first phase with this project. Not only the citywide athletic field study, but for a number of other reasons as well.
Okay, that's great to hear.
So just real quick going through. So overall, we really gave Tibbetts more of an orange red on that one, just because there's so much other work that can influence what we do there. Storm and surface water master plan is underway. It will affect areas in and around and near Veterans, but nothing that's insurmountable. And then we've also at the creek corridor, we also have the King County is working on a creek migration study. There's updated mapping and storm capacity issues. We've also got wayfinding, which is underway right now. And other factors, you know, just the importance of creeks shading and keeping that forested for habitat protection. So we gave that a yellow, as well as Confluence Park, just because, you know, the maintenance shop isn't moving anytime soon. So other proposed improvements. So what we did here is this is an added category, and all of the concepts that we had developed through the public engagement for these anchor parks pre-pandemic, we took all of the ideas that we had received from the community for each park, and we listed them all out. And you will notice here we have elements that are in scope, and then we have down here elements that are out of scope. And this was based upon work that I did solely with the consultant team, as well as shared with the ad hoc committee to make sure we were getting this right. What could we add in that wouldn't have any future impacts, that are easily doable, that don't have a ripple effect as far as some of the constructability elements of them, like an athletic field. Sports fields, you need, you know, drainage systems, you need to pre-treat your water. There's other things that go into those, and making sure we're making a smart investment decision. And also some of them really help dictate, like athletic fields, what happens where and where do they go. And so are we really at the stage where we can start playing with an athletic field at Tibbetts Valley Park or not? And we felt, no, we're not at that stage yet that we could make that decision. So we took that out of scope. And so when we started looking at all these scoping items and given all of the responses above, the one thing that did come out at Tibbetts that felt somewhat doable was a dog park. So that alone is yellow, while the whole park overall is kind of an orange red, because we know this is one feature within a bigger feature. But also when you look at Tibbetts as a whole, maybe there's another site within the park that could be used for a dog park aspect, as we were just thinking. So we're just thinking out loud here. Other amenities to consider, especially at Tibbetts, is, you know, what is the future of Tibbetts Creek Manor? Right now it's being used for city meetings and things, but that could have a huge impact as well on the park space. We also really want to thank the ad hoc committee for this one, is the effort versus impact. And there seems to be a lot of high effort and high impact needed for Tibbetts Valley Park, and we want to make sure we get it right. One of the trade-offs would be if we were to do any of these sports courts or a pavilion or dog park area, we could be looking at the removal of a baseball field, not necessarily for the dog park, but for some of the other elements within the park. And are we ready to do that? So the ad hoc committee felt, yeah, not quite yet. So this is more of an orange shade. But at Veterans, there's a lot of things that we can still add into the scope. Civic Plaza, senior porch activity area, providing more activities for the senior center was really something that came out of all of the community engagement in 2019. For the sport courts, but could we add on to play, a winter use area? Also, what about general pedestrian park depot improvement connections and making those spaces revived? Some things we don't feel we're quite ready, and these are really kind of circled around the field, Danielle, is like a walking loop. We had talked about how could we create a walking loop in and around the field space, a splash and play feature to be of size and scale that people wanted it. Veterans, we're not quite ready to site that yet, and we want to make sure that that location is in a good location for access, visibility, things like that. So we really need to be thinking of those. So as we considered everything within the in scope and out of scope, felt there was a little more low effort and still the opportunity to have some high impact at Veteran when looking at the senior center, depot park, and pedestrian park. Yep, Danielle, I saw you had your hand up.
Sorry, I guess that wasn't clear to me that we were just looking at the senior center pedestrian park, depot park part, because to me, like an improvement to Veterans Memorial Field is going to be like kind of, we have to figure out comprehensively what that the whole area is going to do, right, and how that's going to look. And my recollection was that we were, well, I still think that we have to add also on the trade-off, and maybe we don't if we're not talking about the actual field, but the potential removal of a baseball field, similar to how we have it at Tibbetts.
Right.
I would just add that there as well.
Yeah, and that's really when we took a lot of these elements that impacted the field out of the conversation, like we know a splash pad or a winter skating loop or a walking loop around, really all kind of impact that field. If we're trying to have those conversations and get a doable project by the end of 24,
yeah,
it really felt like some of these other spaces were far more conducive to let's get in, let's make an impact, let's do a great community design and get something built that would still energize and still fulfill all the long-term needs.
Yeah, maybe I can make a quick clarification too, that, and I think we can add this to our narrative as this is a working document, Jen. The first seven criteria really focus on the whole site. This eighth criteria, the proposed improvements, is the first one that starts dialing in and saying, okay, what could we do for 4 million? Or what could we do with this investment? So your point is spot on, Danielle. All of these parks are still going to require the broader vision, but knowing we probably can't finish the broader vision between now and 2024 when this money needs to be spent, that this is the first sort of lens of saying, okay, what specific improvements and where does it make sense specifically on these sites to consider capital improvements in this time sensitive period we have right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it would be, that narrative is helpful, right? And I think that also the narrative, like I think Brad made a comment earlier about Confluence Park talking about phase 2 and then phase 4. It seems like we're giving Confluence Park some negative or some dings because of phase 4. But if phase 4 isn't at all a practical thing to even be talking about, then shouldn't we be evaluating the other criteria about Confluence Park based on phase 2?
Yep.
So it would have, this is a really, I totally appreciate everyone who worked on this, because trying to wrap your head around all these issues is so hard. So it looks great.
And Danielle, to your point right there, I think when we got to this point, in scope phase 2, out of scope phase 4.
Yeah, but it's really important to think about if phase 2 was was conceived with the idea that phase 4 was going to be able to happen, and that being that the park facility was going to move and we were going to be able to activate that. And that was an area that the community was really excited about, and we as a park board are really excited about, and really made Confluence Park an active, like, engaging park, you know, for everybody. And so, you know, to the extent that if that is way down the road in the city plans, you know, like 10, 20, 30 years down the road, but that property that the Eck House is on can have some active use, then I think that we should actually look at that. And that would really finish that part of the park off, you know?
Mhm.
Like, it would complete it. It would feel complete, you know, even though we know that there's a phase 4 for 30
You're
years down the
spot
road.
on there, Danielle. Let's finish talking Creek Corridor real quick because we kind of went through the Confluence Park in that conversation. But Creek Corridor, really, you know, acquisition filling gaps is going to be really, really important with that work, not only for trail connectivity, but also habitat. But we also have a lot of how do we focus on loops and really concentrate on the Old Town area we felt was the most doable out of this. One thing that was talked about that is along the Creek Corridor and kind of also relates to Tibbetts Valley Park a little bit is that dog park element. You know, we've been doing the pop-up dog park tour. The site that is along the Rainier Trail, which is part of the Creek Corridor, right next to the community center. What if that were added in as a potential element within the Creek Corridor that could get done? And so that was talked about potentially being a green, knowing Tibbetts Valley Park could potentially have some overall holistic challenges with it. So Creek Corridor overall, you know, things that are out of scope just because of timing and permitting issues are like bridge connections over Issaquah Creek. Didn't feel we could get through all of that permitting process in time. And we really didn't feel we could focus on the Pickering Reach or Squawk Reach at this time, but really the Old Town felt more doing that. So when you take all of these elements and roll them up, it was the ad hoc's recommendation to really focus. It seems that Veterans Memorial, Senior Center Depot, Pedestrian Park, as well as Confluence Park, when you roll all of these up, are probably the most opportunistic projects for us to be focusing on in order for us to, hey, what can 4 million achieve and what can we construct by the end of 2024? We have a lot of further scoping to do, but just kind of as we looked at some of these criterion and looked at them all rolled up, that's really kind of where the ad hoc settled on. And I'm going to leave it at that and open it up for Jeff, further discussion, or the ad hoc committee, or any of you park board members as well.
Yeah, I would love to hear from the ad hoc members as we drive to this. I want to echo one thing, just a big thank you in all this work, really complex work. This is a work in progress. The one thing I would add to your conclusion, Jen, is the dog park. So, you know, there was some real talk amongst the ad hoc group, and please jump in, team. You know, with the popularity of the dog park at this is the old skate park site, right along the Rainier Trail, really activating an element in an area of the creek corridor or the trail corridor. The group really felt, I mean, if we were to look at really making high impact on investments, that could be a dog park location. I would add a comment we've made before as a park board and staff in our discussions is the reality that we are probably not going to find the golden 10-acre dog park in this town. We are probably going to be a multi-dog park town of strategically located off-leash areas throughout our system. Is that the one maybe we see as an opportunity to utilize these ARPA investments? So with that, ad hoc committee, please jump in.
Yep,
I'll
Chris.
jump in. Some thoughts. So Danielle, that was really observant. We started out and sort of said, yeah, that Confluence Park phase 2 works, but phase 4 is sort of not, shouldn't really be included. But we were still figuring out our perspectives on how to divide things and insert dividing lines within these the main names of the parks. And like for Tibbetts, the feeling was there are some elements that are listed down here in what we can see right now that you could do, but you probably have a bigger impact on the main areas that haven't really been figured out yet. With veterans, there were a lot of areas that you could do some work on and still leave the field area available for whatever that needs to be when it is finally determined. And then similar, but we didn't go back then with like Confluence Park and just say, yeah, phase 4 is really out. And I mean, we kind of knew that, but maybe we didn't quite say it exactly. So I think maybe going back and reestablishing what are some of these ins and outs and dividing lines would be helpful. And then I think one thing that where we started going is when we started talking about the pop-up dog park getting included in this, we started talking about a la carte elements. And this probably makes Jen a little nervous because, you could have multiple a la cartes at multiple sites, which means she has more, the staff has way more projects than is really comfortable. But it might end up being a way to best, spend the 4 million, but it complicates spending that 4 million. And so there's some balance there. And I think one of the next steps we're going to make, in addition to having everybody on the board look at this, was try and get a sense of what all these little individual elements, what does this dog park cost? What does that dog park cost? And how can we spend our budget, so to speak, and then take a look at it again and say, are we going to, kill our staff doing that?
Well, and I would add not just killing the staff, but we have to get this thing done, right? So we have to make sure the complexity, we need to make sure that we have the right mix between, funding, impact, and time, right? Golden triangle. So figure it out.
David, I think I saw your hand up a while back. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of thinking through and absorbing everything, obviously, just because I wasn't part of the ad hoc. But, the way I see it, again, it's my personal view, is I want to see the $4 million as an accelerator and not necessarily just as a gift, like a one-time gift, right? So for me, I would love to hear more from Jen or Jeff and say like, yeah, Tibbetts and veterans are our top priorities. And it doesn't matter if it's a high effort, we should accelerate and contribute some money to get that done because it's always going to be this big behemoth, right? That we got to tackle it at some point. But then it'll always get pushed off because it's so big. And so I see this $4 million as something that can actually accelerate that and say, it's big, and this is the one opportunity we have to actually do something about it so that it does get on the ground. We actually start actioning against it. Yeah, it might not open up in 2024, but in 2026, we're going to love it, right? So I just don't want to completely rule out Tibbetts right at the get-go. That's all I'm saying.
Brad?
Well, I appreciate all the work that you did here putting this matrix together. I think it gives some real good analysis work so that City Council can, make some sense out of it. I'd always thought that Veterans Memorial was the place to go with ARPA funds from the get-go, primarily because it didn't have some of the concerns that these other areas had. To me, probably one of the biggest selling features to Veterans Memorial is the effort versus impact line item. to low effort, high impact, which so that means that $4 million, you get the most for your buck for, in a short timeline. I mean, that's the other element to it is, being able to accomplish something by 2024. And so, in addition to all the greens that Veterans Memorial had, it also shows the low effort, high impact. I hear what you're saying about a la carte. The only consideration, I guess, that I would give to that is on the task force, we really talked about usage of ARPA funds as being kind of a significant impact. And if you spread it out throughout the city, you're not going to really have a visual for the community to see a significant impact. Whereas if you devote all that money in one place, it's a lot easier for the community to actually see that there was an impact as a result of that funding. So all in all, I'm in support of what the ad hoc has put together. That Veterans Memorial is the #1 priority, and I guess I just added a couple things as to why I support that. Thanks.
Danielle?
I just wonder, I'm just gonna counterbalance Brad here. But I wonder if the elements that would actually be addressed at Veterans Memorial Field and Depot
Great.
Park and Pedestrian Park would be as high impact as are indicated on here, because especially if you haven't completed the master planning process for the entire park. I mean, I would think that we would have to do the master plan first, so we know exactly what's going to go in there. And since we haven't done that, like, is that a realistic timeline to do this work? Versus Confluence Park, where we do have a master plan in effect. My question for Confluence Park is, like, I'm really not excited about, I don't get excited about, like, completing the lighting and some trail edging and maybe adding to the playground. Now maybe the Eck House activation could be it, but I would just want us to try to put something in there that would, like, make it so that it would have a higher impact. Because I feel like Confluence Park is the one that, like, we would be ready to go, or, like, we have a master plan in process, and maybe we would have to adjust it. But the low impact part is not exciting, right? I don't know what we're gonna do.
I think one thing that I would mention, Daniel, just in terms of the ad hoc perspective on that impact scale, is the lens that I was looking at through it, at least, was, since Confluence is already so built out, and with Veterans and Tibbetts, we'd basically be going from 0 to something, whereas Confluence, we're already far up the scale, and the benefit, the potential impact would be much more smaller increment there. But I love the point you're making about the master plan, and I think it's thoughtful to have that in place for something like Veterans or Tibbetts, where we might get one shot a generation to kind of redo it. And do we really want to piecemeal it without that long-term vision? And I think the fact that we do have that at Confluence is a great point. And if we can't do what David's talking about in terms of accelerating one of these other locations, then maybe it is something to consider as far as completing what's already begun at Confluence, rather than kind of getting ourselves down a road that we might regret with one of these other spots.
Yeah, and I'll share that, years ago, the city had an opportunity and was exploring putting in a covered tennis facility, like basically putting a bubble or a permanent kind of structure over the outdoor tennis courts. And, we spent a lot of time and effort talking about that, and ended up deciding not to do that, mainly because we didn't have a master plan at Tibbetts, and we didn't want to commit ourselves to a long-term lease with an outside party, that would then restrict what we could do at Tibbetts once we were looking at Tibbetts holistically. And so that would be my concern at Veterans, is it just like if we're not quite there with the master plan, do we want to be building something without knowing what else is going to go there, and then thinking like, you know, in 2 years, be like, oh, kind of like maybe we wouldn't have done it that way. I don't know.
Brad?
I think we've kind of already talked a little bit about master planning efforts, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, we're already kind of set with funding to move forward, aside from ARPA funds, with master planning for the anchor parks, and we could, if veterans were chosen as the priority, that would be start doing that now. Try and have that done by year end, certainly. So you're right, Danielle. Master plan has to be in place in order to decide what to do with this. But you know, early on, we kind of talked about that you know, Jen could correct me here, but we talked, you know, timeline wise, that was still feasible to actually get the master plan accomplished for Veterans Memorial and still be able to use ARPA funds for specific projects. I mean, that still gives you 2 years. If you complete the master plan by the end of this year, that still gives you 2 years to actually get projects completed. And it was my understanding that, you know, 2023 would be, you know, more design permitting. 2024 was going to be construction, so that still could all be accomplished within the ARPA timeline, without currently having a master plan. I mean, I hear you in terms of a master plan already in place at Confluence is attractive, which allows you to get started. But the problem with that is, to me, really the only thing that you're going to spend money on is the Eck House. And are you really going to be able to, you know, give a real significant contribution to the community with just that house? Versus, you know, an impact that you can have for an entire park at Veterans Memorial, leading to other things. You complete the Eck House and you're done with phase 2. That's nice to be done with phase 2, but it doesn't really lead us further into future phases. Whereas if we invest $4 million in Veterans Memorial, that does give us the lead in, you know, for future additional items that would be revealed by the master plan that's developed. That's my additional comments about why Veterans Memorial I still think takes precedent. Thank you.
Is that a realistic timeline to get the master plan done? It felt to me that master plan was done largely in part without the community knowing kind of the historical role that park has played, and that was something that we were going to be revisiting. So it concerns me that we're almost in September, to think that we would be done with a master plan by December seems really aggressive to me. I don't know, but I'm not the expert here.
You know, or within 6 months, you know, take it 2 months, you know, into next year. But I don't know. I mean, that's something for Jeff and Jen to comment about. Really, is that something that can be accomplished if that's the focus, is master plan with Veterans Memorial? That's the priority.
I'm going to answer it a slightly different way, but I'm going to get to the answer because this is a really good discussion. I think this discussion really leads to where the ad hoc committee ended. And I think the goal for tonight wasn't to try and land on what, but I think what we're hearing is these questions are leading to, okay, if we're focusing on Confluent, let's put some focus on Confluence. Let's put some focus on veterans. Let's maybe make a consideration about what a dog park would look like somewhere, and focus our time and attention there in this next month with the architect team and the ad hoc and really start to drill down, okay, where within that site do we do some improvements? What type of improvements can we do, and how much, sort of, where does $4 million get us with each of those? That was going to be our next task, to try and keep this moving forward. To answer your question, Brad, and to your discussion with Danielle, I don't think it's realistic to think we could adopt a master plan and complete these ARPA improvements by 2024. And I say that hesitantly, because I think we want to keep the master plan in mind. And I think part of these criteria really focuses on this. We want to keep the big picture in mind, but I think we need to be honest and recognize the shot clock to complete this project and to spend these ARPA dollars probably does not allow us to have a fully completed master plan of the whole site, a whole vision for whatever site we choose, and the design and permitting of the specific project we're going to do and the completion of that project. So one of the things we really want to focus on, and we talked about this with the ad hoc, is when we decide where we're going to make these investments. That's why that future phasing question is a big question. We want to make these investments with certainty that we're not getting in the way of what that big picture vision is. We're making an investment that's going to live, and it's going to complement the master plan. So forgive me, Brad, I'm not directly answering your question, but I think we have to do a little bit of both. We probably don't have time to fully adopt a master plan, but we need to keep a master plan in mind as we locate and identify the amenities that we're going to invest on any given site, whether it's Confluence, whether it's veterans. That's why veterans really, honestly, and the architect team's already begun working. The ad hoc team kind of saw this, but they're working with this on all the sites for veterans and for Confluence. But it's why the area of pedestrian park, the area around the depot building, that historic depot building, and there's some park space around that. There's park space around the senior center. Those probably become the areas where we're looking at this type of investment, because we know, again, the field has a lot of big questions related to it that we need to spend the time. And I would caution us to think we could complete a master plan within that shot clock and feel like we have that community pressure to get that done in time to make these investments. That might not lead to the outcome we all want.
I think I might add too, just from the ad hoc group, at least on the second meeting that I was able to attend, I had a hard time sort of thinking about, when we were talking about veterans, like, and pedestrian, like, what would this look like? What does this really mean? What are the sections? And I think after we were able to sort of look through the very rough sketches, which I know we wouldn't want to do yet in this more public forum, I was able to sort of wrap my head around how you could parse those out without feeling like you would be in big danger of messing up a master plan, right? Like, so I think for me, it's just really like in my mind, like thinking, okay, if I take that depot section and I take that pedestrian section and I take the senior center and think about those three components, like I can understand how we could make improvements there that would have impact, but that wouldn't necessarily mess with the rest of it. So like when, I was really team Tibbetts, right? To be honest with you, like when we started this process, and just with all the complexities around Tibbetts, I just don't think we can get the plan done enough to know where we would put anything. Doesn't mean that I don't want us to still really work on Tibbetts, right? I really think it's, in desperate need of a lot of things. But I think, I came around to, gosh, with the time we have and the amount of money we have, what could be a feasible piece that I don't think we would be shooting ourselves in the foot 2 years from now saying, man, I wish we didn't put that there, right? Like it felt like it was contained enough. Along with, and maybe this is a little bit too a la carte, but then along with potentially the dog park where the old skate park was, I think is also a really good thing we could do that I don't think would mess too much with any further planning efforts. Like that felt pretty contained as well.
I appreciate you also mentioning those sketches, Marlene. I really appreciate this discussion. Full transparency, I think those are something we can quickly share because I think they tee up the next work that the ad hoc committee is going to do and really what we want to bring back in September that starts to drill down to, and I think gets to your good point, David. How can this investment also be an accelerator? How can this investment also recognize it can't be a standalone, the only investment for any of these sites. Each of these sites to become the public spaces that like this community wants, it's going to take more investment. So, um, Jen, I don't know if you have those, but I know it was helpful. These are meant, I'm going to preface them. These are squint while you look at these. These are not design elements. This is a landscape architect. This is Methune professionally saying, all right, what would that corridor and better unifying those public spaces to veterans and Front Street start to look like? And how could you make investments? And I know they did something similar with Confluence. They also did something really similar with Dog Park. And maybe, Jen, we can show these really just quickly. And I think this really leads to previewing or setting up the next set of work with the ad hoc committee.
Yeah, this, again, as Jeff said, this is drawn on bumwad, which architect is tissue paper, and it's meant to be quick drawn and thrown away and drawn over time and time again as a layering process for duties. So this was just a first what if for this space. But, you know, how can we really make this, add some catenary lighting in here, add some seating and gathering areas, add some benches and really activate this, but also really tie this core to the depot through the parking lot and really enhance this visual that really kind of gets broken up right now with the natural environment. We talked about all season stuff. What if there was a warming circle, or, you know, maybe that's a water feature instead, but something that would be a gathering space for that. There's one more page that goes over towards Depot Park and kind of the senior center. How could we, this is that fire area or warming area, but how can we improve this edge of the Depot Park, but really start making this relationship connection? We'd also talked about how could we improve some ADA access down into the existing play area from this edge as well. But how could we create some gathering spaces and some outdoor seating and really start, because the courtyard for the senior center right now is sunken and it's very private. And if you sit in it, you can't even see out. For Confluence Park, real quick, we talked about we really need to stay in this focus area. This parking up here, that is a future project. Just, we drew it in just so we kind of knew where our limits. That's a future public works project that is not funded, but it does impact the park. Here's the Eck House. How could we add some outdoor space over in there and maybe enhance some play area improvements? The main 12-foot trail would have the concrete edging, and then the trail that goes from Rainier Avenue to the bridge and the bridge over to 3rd. There's existing path lighting through there right now, and we'd be extending those all the way to Rainier and 3rd. And then as far as the dog park, kind of what's there over by the Rainier Trail, but here's the existing parking, create a shy dog area, an open space area. And there's existing water and things over in there. So we'd add some enhanced water features and gates for the park, but just so we can start pricing out, getting out quantitative, like what do these start to cost? So that's kind of where we're just thumbnail sketching at each of these parks, looking at some of the preferred elements from there. So with that, any,
Yeah, I guess I would say, we did do this at Tibbetts with the skate park, right? We did like a, without, figuring out our whole new master plan, we took a piece that was going to be, that really, couldn't, whatever we did there wasn't necessarily going to affect the rest of the park, right? And so we do have, I guess we can look at veterans in a similar way. I guess I would just want to look at those improvements, thinking about, would they be different if we did a different, like depending on what we did with the field, would you be doing something different in those senior center areas and pedestrian park? So would the field area improvements drive what you do elsewhere? And then also, if not, like, and if we proceeded, would it really be a high impact? Low effort, high impact. Those are my questions. I had one more question too. This is like big picture. Did we look at all at doing the Central Park? I don't remember what pad it is, but it's like the remaining pad that we looked at improving when we turfed the new field. When we turfed did the last improvements and added the big turf fields, we basically removed the community's green space that they use, right? And so the idea was that that green space would move across the street and it would be in that beautiful view area. And I don't remember kind of what the price tag on that project is, but that's another standalone project that would have a huge community impact.
Yeah, Pad 4 and Issaquah Highlands or Central Park were not at least considered as we had the conversation with the council for this community investment strategy.
Do we have an idea if that would be within that, like how much that would cost?
Oh boy, I just, given the price of materials, given the export needs, given the origin story of where that soil all came from in that park,
Yeah.
there's probably a lot of dirt that needs to be moved. That pad would be much more than $4 million to do it in its entirety.
Yeah. Okay. Just
Great
want to throw that
question.
out as another,
Yeah.
that was another project that sort of is really going to be a grassy area with a view, right? So we're not talking enormous amount of infrastructure.
Amphitheater,
So.
some other amenities,
Yeah.
Loop trails. Yep.
Yeah.
Brad, did you have a comment?
Yeah, actually, I kind of like how Marlene got to it with kind of a phasing of Veterans Memorial and a way of being able to tie in those elements without necessarily having a final master plan. I kind of think that one of my suggestions would be at least to still move forward with the master planning process for Veterans Memorial, with maybe an emphasis on those elements in terms of depot and pedestrian, to be, not having a final master plan for the rest of the ball field and all that, but at least maybe having that portion of it and consider it a phasing opportunity. I like the sketches that I saw there. I think that would be a big impact to the community right there in the heart of Old Town. If I guess it comes down to cost, what can we get accomplished with those sketches with $4 million? But I think that a lot could be done with $4 million in that phasing. And it also kind of ties in a little bit with what David's talking about as an accelerator to be able to take some of those next phase steps with Veterans Memorial once the master plan was actually completed, which I understand it takes time and we need to do it right, and so maybe it takes till the end of 2023 or something before that can get accomplished. But if you already get phase one done with depot and pedestrian and working towards getting the master plan done, it really puts us in a good spot to accelerate into getting, the rest of Memorial done. you know, the flip side of that, and in terms of what Danielle was talking about in terms of confluence, I think with the 4 million, you could probably get everything done completed in phase 2. But then you're done. You're over with. There's no accelerator, you know, to phase 4 because that's so far away that's just not in our lifetime or in my lifetime anyway. And so I'd like, if we're going to invest $4 million, it makes sense to low effort, high impact, accelerator, heart of Old Town. You know, it's a step phase process towards something much bigger for Veterans Memorial. I guess I keep kind of coming back to full loop Veterans Memorial, but I like that it's a phase concept, and it sounds like that's how Marlene was able to get to it as well. Thanks.
Hey, Zach, I'd love to turn this back to you as the chair, just checking out time. Thank you, Park Board members, for the chance to just, I think, preview those sketches. We will happily add those to the minutes so that anyone watching, or, you know, those sketches will be added to the minutes of this meeting. But I think it tees up nicely. And I just throw this back to you, Zach, with a suggestion of what I'm hearing is, we'll continue working with the ad hoc group. We're going to bring in the landscape architect team, our consultant architect team, for a couple meetings, and we will take those sites, those areas that it sounds like the park board is in agreement with, and start asking the questions. What specifically can $4 million get us? What do these improvements start to more specifically look like? Bring that information back on all 3 of those locations for the September meeting. And really open it up for discussion, and hopefully be able to land on some type of recommendation at our September meeting.
Yeah, it sounds as though those the criteria and those 3 potential sites are kind of everybody seems to be in agreement with at least one of those as being the best course of action moving forward. So I think definitely seems like the subcommittee is on the right track with that.
So in that scenario, are we saying we would not be doing any scoping for confluence, or is that, like, do we want to see what would happen with the EC building?
No, I am suggesting,
Okay.
Marlene, we do scoping with Confluence. So that would
Okay.
be Confluence, this conglomeration of veterans and dog park along the Rainier Trail.
Got it.
Basically everything in that category 8 that has a green next to it are the ones that are going into further consideration.
Yep, that's what we're suggesting. Great. Well, we'll proceed with that. I just thank you so much for this discussion. Jennifer, great work with the architect team, and then Andrew, Marlene, and Chris. I know time is sensitive, but you adding some extra hours to do this work alongside of us has been great work. Appreciate everybody's just thoughtful energy in this. Thanks.
Right. So I believe Hillside was the next agenda item.
It is. Looking at time, I'm going to make, a suggestion. First, I know we wanted to hear public comment. Dave Kapler has been patiently waiting and listening to this discussion. So maybe after public comment, Jennifer, I'm calling a bit of an audible. Maybe we can do an abbreviated update presentation. The intent, what you're going to hear tonight, is the plan is to come back to you in September anyways, after sort of the public feedback ends August 31st. So we can reserve, I guess, the bigger conversation for September as well. But public comment first.
David, I brought you up as a panelist. You should be able to turn on your video if you choose, or at least your mic, and make your public comment. Thank you so much for waiting. Good evening.
Mute.
You're okay. We can hear you. Please say something. Oh,
Oh, David, you're muted now. Unmute.
I unmuted you again. David, try to say something.
Okay, you should hear me now.
There you go.
Okay.
Yes, loud and
I
clear.
can be, this process has been pretty amazing on the community investment. Well done, great comments from the park board members. It's exciting. I think being a downtown resident, a block and a half from Memorial Field, so I'm prejudiced, but I think you're on the right track here, given the timing and the money. Just I was curious about wetland mitigation. I assume there's some mitigation involved with the Hillside Park issue of wetlands, since there's an impact there on the existing one, although most of us don't realize it's so much of a wetland. Anyway, we've had great success on East Sunset with the community working on the green Issaquah, removing ivy and stuff. Admittedly, they weren't working on a sensitive piece of land. It was not identified as a wetland or a steep slope or something. But it seems like I'd like to see some mitigation being done. And I think we have enough good community members that would be able to help improve some of the wetlands that are in that same area. Some of them are on a steep hillsides, admittedly, but there's between the lower and upper cemetery, there's definitely wetlands, and maybe some of the mitigation could be directed that way. Also, one of the things we've been working on Trails Club is trying to connect Cougar Squawk and Tiger Mountain. One of the links that does that is the 1890s actually power line corridor that is to the north of both cemeteries. And is that, if we can be kind of thinking about that as a potential trail and also connecting to Hillside Park without impacting the cemeteries, that would be great. If we can get over up there and use that same corridor to get down to the valley, we then can connect Cougar and Squawk, and then the proposed King County Lake Sammamish to Cedar River Trail likely is only going to get from Lake Sammamish to Squawk Mountain, but it could connect in there in the valley and really help out the whole more regional type trail system. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment.
So Zach, I'm thinking, looking at 8:47 and knowing we want to have some directors' reports as well. Jen, looking at you also, would you like to see the maybe the slides with the proposed concept that we have out to the community right now for public? The public, we've invited them to give us their feedback until August 31st. We were hoping to just sort of have an overview of that, get any thoughts or questions you all might have as a board, and then recognize once we get that feedback, we'd be coming back to you all in September with sort of our recommendation for whether to proceed this proposed concept into actual design and permitting. We're sort of coming to this endpoint of the planning process. We certainly feel like, given the last stage of feedback we heard from the community, if you remember, we had a number of play amenities and other trail improvements, and some questions about whether to have a backstop or not. At our last go around of engagement, we got some great feedback from the neighborhood that really helped us shape this proposed concept. So Jen, maybe if you want to share the screen, I'll hand it over to you to I think, cover maybe the concepts. I then can touch really briefly on Mr. Kapler's question about where wetland mitigation fits into this process, because it will definitely need to fit in this process, but it'll certainly be more addressed during design and permitting. Jen, it's all yours for a quick overview.
Okay, I'm going to flag and I've done this before, Brad, you've all seen me, but real quick because I know we have some new park board members. The Hillside Park is a very large park. We're only looking at a 2-acre area here in the corner for improvements. For 2 years, we've been working with the community. Here's some of the existing site conditions. You can see there's a wet area. It's a beautifully wooded area that the community really wants to maintain. We've done our public engagement process. We've asked them a lot of questions. We've talked on site with them. Last summer, we spent time with the community. Really, one of the main impacts of the site is we have a wetland in the middle of the park. And do you want to keep the wetland and its buffers, or do you want to keep an open play area, which requires mitigation? And both the community and you as a board supported the mitigation route in order to keep an open play space. So with that, we then changed our focus to, okay, we know that base piece of information now. Let's focus on play areas. And so through May of this year and last year, we really started focusing on the play. There's 4 main themes that are shown. We've also gone to several of the boards over time. You can go back, but just here's somewhat of the impact of the wetland and its buffer within the park. These are all older. We've also talked about adding some additional trail connectivity to clean up some conflicts of use between pedestrians walking through the grave sites rather than in a designated space. Some of the proposed concepts, which are truly based upon public feedback. These were sent to some adjoining neighbors as well as the trail connection. Some cemetery neighbors received letters as well, offering a sneak peek at the improvements and an opportunity to talk with us. But here's kind of the overall concept: an accessible route down to a play area. We're keeping the field. We'll have to mitigate that, and a small overlook in trail connectivity in here. Here's kind of a perspective view, knowing keeping a native environment was really, really important, and low visibility, low impact visibility. We found a little corner that seemed to fit well in keeping the play area. We know this is the famed sledding hill, not to be touched, so the community can enjoy. But really, how can we promote a gathering space here? People love to play on the big rock here, but how can we provide some low impact play space over there? Here's another view as to what that would look like with a slide and a swing and some log climbers, things that really keep in context with a wooded environment. And these are out to the community, as Jeff mentioned, on a survey right now. You can go to the Hillside Park website to catch the link. I've also emailed it to many of the neighbors on our contact list. But here's somewhat of a bird's eye view of those improvements with the accessible trail coming in and leading you into the forested area. As Jeff mentioned, kind of what's next, conceptual design, we're wrapping up kind of the feedback. We'll come back to you for your blessing to be able to move forward into design and permitting. And then we get into the nitty gritty, construction documents, detailed design, and permitting. And that's really then, once we get all the construction documents and the permitting and the SEPA documents all together, which is our environmental, we start into the permitting process. And during that time, we will go through all the different regulatory agencies that have oversight within mitigating a wetland, where those mitigation efforts might take place and how. But that does include an environmental neighborhood meeting as part of the city's process. So there will be a separate time, again, to look at a full detailed design and its impacts on the existing wetland. And then hopefully 2024 will be into bid and construction. That's my 2-second oversight, and there's the web link if you need it.
So if I can just add real quickly, Jen, thank you. Super quick overview. This began as a rather emotional conversation with the neighborhood. When you do a survey and 55% of the neighborhood respondents want added play features and 45% don't want any added play features, that creates a real delicate approach to trying to achieve balance. This proposed concept that's out right now is the effort that we've made, I think, demonstrates a lot of feedback, a lot of conversation we've had here, and feedback we've heard from you all as the park board. We think we're getting really close to achieving balance, to finding a way to add play to a neighborhood park that is beginning to change. Families are moving in and want play, but also recognizing there's a large amount of those neighbors that still want that park to feel natural. And so this concept, we think, achieves that balance. We hope it achieves the balance. We look forward to hearing feedback. We want to get the concept right before we get into design and permitting. And so that's why we're taking this time to do this. To Mr. Kapler's question about the wetland, and just to reiterate what Jen said, how that wetland is mitigated, how we're able to achieve the field function that the neighborhood wants. The neighborhood wants a functioning field. So to have a functioning field, we're gonna have to fully mitigate that wetland. Department of Ecology and some of these other regulatory agencies have a pretty large say in how and where we mitigate that. So we too want those questions answered, but those questions of how we're going to mitigate, utilizing some of our volunteer efforts, utilizing some of the community efforts to do some of that mitigation, we'll know a lot more as we enter into and go through the permitting process for this effort. So there's a quick summary of Hillside. We'll come back in September with more info. Any questions, thoughts, comments? What any of you are maybe hearing out in the community, things we should be aware of?
All right. So I guess if nobody has any questions or comments about Hillside, I guess we'll wrap things up with the chair and director's report. I don't believe we have youth report. There's going to be a virtual open house to review Title 18 with a Q&A with the city tomorrow from 4 to 6 p.m. Also, there will be on September 9th, a Issaquah Welcomes You Cultural Diversity program from 5 to 8 p.m. And there's salmon at sunset at the salmon hatchery, celebrating the start of spawning season on September 17th from noon to 6. So, Jeff?
And speaking of spawning season, some terrific viewing points along Issaquah Creek. Please be sure to go to the Confluence Bridge. What a great place for viewing the salmon's return back up the creek. It's pretty amazing. September. You might recall, we'll have we're anticipated and plan to have our first in-person meeting in September. Those in-person meetings will be taking place in what's called the Steelhead Room, which is the new meeting room right across the street from my office near the community center. As details get finalized with the clerk's office in the coming weeks, we'll make sure that you have ample time for what that transition means and what that looks like. So certainly more information coming there. Another thing I wanted to point out with our September meeting is the council recently adopted a holiday and cultural calendar that is sort of allowing us as a city to be informed as we look at community meetings, to make sure we are sort of honoring cultural holidays that many in our community recognize. I believe our scheduled meeting on September 26th may have a conflict with that. So I'll be working with Zach here shortly in probably getting a doodle poll out to everybody. We may be needing to move that meeting. We'd like to keep it in that same week. It's the week of the 26th, but we might need to move it to a different day. Stay tuned. It's been a busy summer for us. I'm going to be giving an update to the council on September 6th of all of our summer activities. After that presentation, I will send a copy to all of you so you'll have a chance to see just the amazing work. This department is staffed with some amazing people that really, really care about this community. And so it's always fun to share those updates to the council and to you all and to the community. There's one more item I was going to touch on. Oh, September, just agenda is certainly shaping up to be pretty big. We'll be bringing back the community investment strategy. Thank you, ad hoc committee. We'll continue that work with you. Hillside Park will be coming back to you as well. You might recall our colleagues in Public Works have been working on a stormwater and surface water master plan. We may be trying to squeeze in an update from them on that effort as well, just because I think it could be quite timely with the planning work that they have going on. So thank you all for just your passion and interest. And look at that, it's 9 o'clock. So I'm done talking. Back to you, Zach.
All right. So with that, I think we'll close out the meeting, and we'll get back to you about the time or picking out a different date for the next meeting. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good night, everyone.